Right, welcome everyone to this webinar in which we're going to be exploring students, brands and GDPR. We've got some really interesting stuff to cover off this afternoon, including what all student marketers can learn from the steps taken by a leading publisher on their journey to GDPR compliance. Discover and learn from the largest survey of students' attitudes to privacy, GDPR and brand, and what we can learn and incorporate into our own strategies. Before we start, I just want to remind everyone that we will be recording and hosting the webinar, and we're going to send it out to you afterwards, along with a link to all the resources we refer to in the presentation. So if you are trying to make notes, then don't worry, you can watch and rewind at a later date. I also really want to encourage you to participate, comment, ask questions, challenge and take advantage of the panel we've put together for you today. There's a Q&A box on your screen, and if you pop your questions in here during the webinar or at the end, we'll get to as many of them as possible for you. So give it a go now and just write a little hello so that we know that you're here. You're going to hear three voices today, and mine least of all, so let me first introduce myself. My name's Rich Campbell, and I'm Head of Marketing at Natives Group. In my role, I've been one of our company leads on not just our own GDPR compliance, but also how we support our sector through their own process by creating student marketing-specific support resources. And previous to this role, I've held positions as Head of Marketing and Admissions at a specialist HE institution and marketing management roles in FE and HE and FE. So we've got a cracking panel here today for you. So guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Thanks, Rich. My name's Dan, and I'm the founder of Student Hut. So essentially, we're the fastest growing student review and opinion site in the UK. In under 5 years, we've built up an engaged community of over 2 million students leaving and sharing their opinions. A really exciting chapter on the story happened last year when Student Hut became part of the Natives Group.
Oh, nice. Thanks, Dan.
I know.
Hi. My dulcet tones. So I'm Steve Evans. I'm the founder and CEO of Natives Group. And today actually is our 10-year birthday, 10-year anniversary since the business was set up out of a bedroom at home. We now have 130 odd natives across the world, including in offices in China and in New York and across the UK. Most people know us from our primary brand, which was Net Natives, which is still Net Natives, our advertising brand, as well as know us for our technology, which we put under the brand of Natives PP. But we've expanded the brand out. A lot of people saw that over the start of this year, where we expanded from being a single brand to a house of brands. And the reason for that is just that we've grown so much. So, for us to then talk about Net Natives, but when actually a lot of work we're doing is in research or is in data, and that's why expanding things out into Natives Global Consulting. I won't go through each of the different brands here, but look at natives.group and you'll see them. I would recommend one thing out of these brands. We have a website that we launched at the start of the year called thenative.com, run by a guy called Dave Musson, who is one of the leading social media strategists in the UK. He was head of social media for Warwick Uni. And they have a fantastic newsletter, which goes out every week called What is Good. And if anyone here is interested in anything to do with inspiring content, I would strongly suggest looking at thenative.com. Obviously, that newsletter is incredibly GDPR compliant, as in all of our stuff there. All right, thank you.
Okay, so what I'm going to do now is give you guys a little bit of background on Student Hut. So essentially, we're the go-to place to help students with their student lifestyle choices. So as you can see on the slide, we've got over 60,000 student reviews. We've got reviews on everything from courses to accommodation to nightlife, university clubs and societies, Freshers Week, and much more. And essentially, what we do is we give students true insights to help them make the right choices for them. And having built up this large community of students who love to share their opinions and views, last year it made sense to launch the Student Hut Opinion Panel, aka SHOP. It's the most engaged student audience insight panel in the UK. And what we do with this is we help brands and universities to really understand the youth market. It's really interesting to see how brands can use true insights data to sort of inform their marketing strategy. So what I'm going to do now is talk a little bit about our growth and our student reach. So it's been a really exciting few years since we launched back in the kitchen in 2013, when we could reach about 10,000 students, right through to today, where we're part of the Natives Group and we can reach over 2 million. Our growth really has been powered by a number of different elements. So, back in the day when I launched Student Hut, budgets were pretty tight. So I focused a lot on social media, and with minimal spend, I managed to grow a massive network of viral student-related social media pages. So if you look at the top right of the slide, you can see an example there of just one of the pages we own, which is called Dear Sixth Formers. So that post in the screenshot with just that single post, we managed to generate over 10,000 clicks through to Student Hut with our exact target audience. Essentially now we run over 50 student-related pages and have a reach of over 500,000 students across social media. Since then, we've also become embedded in schools as well, in colleges across the country. We've got over 2,000 career advisors signed up to Student Hut, all sharing our resources with their students. We also do a lot of work on SEO, of course. So we've got a team of specialists who help to drive a significant amount of organic traffic. And as we talked about a couple of times, since joining the Natives Group, we've now got bigger marketing budgets than we've had before. And what we're doing right now is really investing heavily back into growing our audience. And we do that using paid for social and programmatic campaigns through the student trading desk, which you would have seen, which was part of the Natives Group on the previous slide, which has really propelled our monthly audience growth by about 500%.
Bigger budgets, always worrying as well, isn't it?
Yeah, well, yeah, it's exciting to go from just me doing it in my kitchen with not much money at all.
Look, and it's important, it's Steve again, it's important to say about, so Dan and I met each other, I think at YMS or Youth Marketing Conference a few years ago, and we're talking, and the synergy, the excitement for us as an ad agency and a technology group was data and insight, and that's what we're able to really bring out. But also, what is really exciting from us from a creativity point of view, and we're going to talk about this in a second, is when we work with universities and brands, we normally have to speak through the prism of these confines of a brand and the challenges that you have as marketers to speak within a brand. What we really like working with in Student Hut is exactly what we can see up here, is being able to be a little bit more frivolous and joyful and different because we're speaking directly through to the student. And that's given us so much insight from our own creativity as well.
Great, right, let's kick off and introduce the content we're going to be covering with you today. So whether you're watching live or on demand, it really is fantastic to have you, and we do hope that you find the content of this presentation useful and insightful. This is not another webinar about GDPR. It's about audience perceptions, audience insights, and how you can keep your brand safe by understanding what a best-in-class publisher looks like and how you can be clear that your brand is being represented by publishers and platforms. As we're going to go on to uncover, this is vital for each and every one of you. There's no doubt that GDPR represents a challenge for all youth brand marketers, universities, colleges and institutions. But also, we hope, like us, you see GDPR as an opportunity. We believe that the legislation will have a net positive impact on student marketing. As a rule, you've genuinely got value to add, something interesting to say, sell or change. And the huge amount of content noise that the youth market is subjected to is about to go down. And trust in those operating ethically will go up. That means your content will talk to people who want to be talked to, and your marketing will be received by those who want to receive it. We're going to get into how trust between students, brands and publishers can be established and maintained so that you can maintain a competitive advantage and establish a truly effective long-term relationship with your audience. So let's start with some definitions, and I'm not going to dwell on this beyond the very top line. GDPR stands for General Data Protection Regulation. It's Europe's new framework for data protection laws, and it's replacing the previous 95 Data Protection Directive, upon which current UK law is based. The legislation is designed to harmonise data privacy laws across Europe, as well as give greater protection and rights to individuals. It includes new rights for people to access the information companies hold about them, obligations for better data management for businesses, and a new regime of fines. So I'm not going to use this presentation to go into any further detail, as there's so much out there. But if you're still unclear at this stage about your obligations as a marketer, then I'd recommend you and your teams take our GDPR Confidence Survey, which helps highlight where you're at on the risk register with recommendations for next steps. And we're going to send that as a resource to you after this presentation. Steve, do you want to run through about our approach as a group to GDPR?
Sure. I said we have had a rehearsal on this, I think, but you probably won't think that we have, but we have. And I said in the rehearsal that this morning I actually had, completely unprepared, but I had one of our monthly GDPR compliance meetings. I've been having those for about 18 months. The reason why we've been so focused on it over the past 18 months is that as an agency, we're also a technology group. So we've developed tools where we can track the individual as well as who's responding to our ads, which means we collect a lot of personal identifiable data on behalf of universities. We've got something like 30 million data points. So we already knew as a technology as well as an ad business how important and what we needed to do on GDPR. We were already accredited to the highest level government approved, so something called Cyber Essentials Plus, which is the highest level of data security. We already, as well as Rich, but we put through three of our in-house people and IT security and technology people on GDPR compliancy training. We have technologies, as I mentioned, there's something there on point two, which is a hashing tool. So 18 months ago, we developed something as soon as the lookalike audience came out where we could take data and we could load it up. So I personally identify email data, load it up without it leaving our own client's browser, and it comes straight through to us as binary code that we can create lookalike audiences for, so which is GDPR compliant. That was 18 months ago. And as a media buyer, we have been working on behalf of our clients in order to send out GDPR compliancy surveys to our publishers. In fact, we have a GDPR compliance confidence survey that if you're interested in, we can send you a link to, and it will give you insight on where you are and what risks you've got. So the long and short of it is that we work bloody hard to make sure that we are GDPR compliant because we've had to. We have a different risk on us. We are a technology business as well as an advertising group, so there's been a lot of focus on it. There is a survey that you can also do within the ICO. A link again, we'll send it out, which is the Information Commissioner's Office, which will then give you your own ranking depending on what you've done. And we've come out on the highest accreditation on that as a group. So we know we're in a good space, but it's been really interesting and a real challenge because we've got so many different brands to then see on how we're going to do this with Student Hub. So that's been the interesting side. And look, this slide is to talk about it. We've approached it very much as we need to get everything right. We need to be squeaky clean, so we've done that. But also we've looked at it as an opportunity, and this is what is going to come out of this case study from Student Hub and also from yourselves is there is a fantastic opportunity within GDPR now in order to clean out data, in order to really understand who you are and why someone wants to deal with you, in order to be quite innovative and creative in your content. And it is other publishers, other content providers are not going to be able to send unsolicited emails under GDPR compliancy rules, which means there is going to be a lot less clutter, a lot less noise out there in people's inbox. So there's a real opportunity for brands to position themselves and have relevance and resonance with an audience and really to grow that trust. So we really see it as an opportunity.
Yeah, it's definitely an opportunity. And what I'm going to do, I suppose since we joined the Natives Group, we've done a lot of work really to become GDPR compliant. And what I'm going to do now is essentially talk through the steps that we took as Student Hut in order to become GDPR compliant. So it's been a lot of work, but there's been some really good benefits that have come out of it, which we'll get onto. So I'm going to start off by just sort of setting the scene. So since 2013, we built up an email subscription list of over 220,000 students. And what we did is we used the guys here at Natives to run a GDPR audit for us, and they identified all the sign-up forms that had driven these subscribers. Having done this, we recognized that actually we needed to get over 150,000 re-engaged and opted back in order to be officially compliant. So how did we do this? So what we did first of all is that we sort of started with the more traditional campaigns, and I'm sure many of the listeners to this webinar have been receiving email upon email upon email over the last few weeks asking you to opt back in to certain brands. We did start off with this style. So what we did is send an email out and we reminded our users of the useful content. It's really good practice to do this and send it in the traditional style. But the issue we could see is that when we saw the number of students who were actually bothering to even take the time to re-engage and opt in, it really wasn't consistent with the number of active email subscribers that typically engage with our campaigns and drive awesome results for our clients. So we needed to do something different. We wanted to really design a campaign that was going to be more effective and compel students to take action and really engage. So how did we do this? So essentially what we thought about was, let's take it back to the basics. Why did students sign up to Student Hut in the first place? Well, there's quite a few reasons for signing up to Student Hut, but for this case study, what I'm going to do is focus on offers, freebies, and competitions, which is one of the reasons why students will have joined Student Hut. So what we wanted to do was not talk about GDPR. The plan was to get our students really excited about a particular offer that we know that they're going to love and they're going to want to take action on there and then. So we sent out the following email. For current students, we offered free beer, free pizza, and free donuts. For prospective students, free pizza, donuts, and KFC, because obviously we couldn't offer beer to prospective students. So it's important to note at this stage that you might be sort of listening to this webinar thinking, what's this got to do with GDPR? How are people re-engaging? The purpose of this email wasn't to do that at all. All we want to do at this stage is get our students excited, and we want them to click through to try and redeem the offer and maximize engagement. And on the way through to the offer, we presented our users with the pop-up, which you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. And at this point, this is where we asked them the question which we're interested in. Would you still like to receive emails like this in the future? Giving them clear options to either click yes or click no, and then after this, taking them through to the offer. So they have to take a positive action to re-engage and become GDPR compliant. It's also really important to note from this that whether they click yes or whether they click no, they'll still be taken through to the offer, because of course with GDPR, you're not allowed to deny features or functionality. All we're doing is asking if they want to continue to receive alerts like this in the future. Now, this campaign was an awesome one for us, and we repeated it multiple times. From this one email alone, we drove thousands of clicks. And because our users were excited about getting the offer, they obviously decided they wanted to keep getting emails like this in the future. And we had 92% of users selecting they still wanted to receive these emails. We've repeated this tactic time and time again throughout the year. For example, when we launched new league tables earlier in the year, we sent an email out saying, find out the best nightclub in your city. What's the most popular club and society at your university? And today we're still sending out campaigns with just 7 days to go to get the last sort of active subscribers back over and opting back in. So we've got an email going out with free cinema tickets, which I suspect will do really well. So I suppose with this sort of campaign, all these campaigns, we were really interested to see how did the list compare that had opted back in and become compliant again with the rest of the list of people that were not responding to our campaigns. And the results for me were really pretty staggering. So you can see here that the click-through rate of the GDPR compliant list was 10 times that of the non-compliant list for a recent brands newsletter that we sent out, and the open rate was 3 times higher. So despite the fact that the GDPR compliant list drove much better results, despite the fact that the GDPR compliant list was smaller, it still drove better results than the larger list for a recent campaign we ran for Amazon Prime Student. So now I'm just going to talk through the honest results of the case study. So, I mean, there's been a clear impact on what we sort of call vanity metrics. We can no longer claim 220,000 students, but actually, as we just talked about, the results we're getting, and that's what we care about. We care about the outcomes for our clients, and the results we're driving from the GDPR compliant list are much more powerful than the non-GDPR list. There's obviously a really good exercise for us to do this and actually clear out subscribers that weren't even engaging with us anymore. And we're now up to a point with all these campaigns that we've been running throughout the year where we've got a GDPR compliant list of about 85,000 students, and we're growing very quickly. So we've got about 15,000 new subscribers every month, and we're well on track to have a larger and much more engaged opted-in database at the end of the year than actually before we started this exercise.
And look, it's an important thing. So Steve again, when Dan and I met, we were talking about the business and the integration and how it would fit within Natives Group. We were talking about vanity metrics mostly, and actually now we've gone through this. I mean, the business is fantastic anyway, and we're excited about how everything falls together. But it's a more relevant and more interesting and a more engaged audience. I don't know if we'll talk about it later, but I think it's useful to talk about now is any publisher that hasn't done a GDPR compliancy side and they're saying that it hasn't hit their metrics, hasn't done GDPR, it is going to hit you. You know, no matter what you do, some people, and we're all getting these emails, you're not subscribing back to all of them. So unless it's done in the right way, you are going to get a hit. But if it's done in the right way, what is exciting is the engagement, is that engagement from that re-engaged audience.
And I think the worrying thing for me was the fact that when we sent out the initial email, we know that we tried great results for our brands, and we can see that people weren't re-engaging with it. Yeah. So it's really, I mean, one of the key takeaways for me is taking it back to the basics. Why are people joining your mailing list? Get them excited about that, and then sort of leverage off the back of that.
Yeah, that was the fun part of getting involved. And look, there was a lot of pushback. You know, guys, we can talk about this. So Rich, as head of marketing, there was a lot of challenge and there was a lot of friction on what is right and what's not. And it's really important. I didn't mention it about what we did as an agency. We spent tens and tens and tens of thousands of pounds with a fantastic consultancy. I would highly recommend them. So we have our own trained people, but we work with our lawyers, set up a GDPR compliancy business called Northwall Cyber. And so we have spent a lot of money with those guys, making sure our privacy policies, our contracts and everything is all up to date and is GDPR compliant, as well as running past campaigns with them to say, is this? And look, we know that there are boundaries that have been pushed and that friction of what is creative and what's going to drive results, but everything has been GDPR compliant. And it's been a really interesting creative process. I think, it has been friction, we're smiling here because we're at the end of the journey, but it has been friction, but it's been really great to come through that. And
as an in-house marketer for the group, so working with Dan and the creativity that their team put into communicating with students and getting cut through, that's been the fascinating thing. Previously I was working in marketing roles for 10 years talking to students, but there's so much you can learn from brands like Student Hut if you are a university marketer listening, and that has been a big key takeaway from me is find out your why, but also keep creativity at the core of all your comms, and that's a powerful combination.
You're absolutely spot on, Richard. And it's knowing the audience. What does that audience is going to engage? So it's been a really big thing for us there. But fundamentally as well, right, you've got to adhere to GDPR, all of the fundamental principles. You've got to have opt-in. You've got to have consent. They've got to be able to then check and know what's going on with your data or with their data. All of the creativity is going to fall apart. And we can see this. So we mystery shop our clients. We mystery shop some publishers. We know when they're not being GDPR compliant, and we can still see it now. And I don't know if this is going to be a question that's going to come up later, but I've heard confusion around this if you're using data that has been gathered pre-25th of May 2018, so pre-next week, next Friday, and then it hasn't been GDPR compliant as you collected it, and then you're emailing them after on the 26th, you are breaching GDPR laws, right? So you're sending data illegally. All of the data that you've collected and that you're using and you're sending out has to be collected GDPR compliant. That's a big thing that again was the friction, and we had to really get to the bottom of that because we weren't sure. And it's a grey area, but it's fundamental. You are not allowed, unless you've collected your data, which adheres to the GDPR thing. So they can opt out anytime. They can show that there's implicit consent in order to send them messages that they can then see and view their data at any time. Unless you've done that, then you can't send the messages. You can't do the creative side.
I think the only final point I wanted to make was about be kind to those publishers that are presenting key, those key metrics. If someone's lost what we're calling a vanity metrics, don't hammer them, don't abandon them. It just means they've gone through an ethical GDPR process, and they are actually the publishers and the platforms that you probably want to stay loyal to.
I agree.
Most definitely, and I suppose like for Student Hut as well, we've been running all these campaigns and we talked about the friction that we'd had. We actually were really interested to find out what students think about this and what they think about GDPR as well.
Fair point. Good segue there.
Good, wasn't it?
Good segue. Nice.
So what we did is we wanted to understand what our student panel were thinking for a few different reasons. First of all, we wanted to identify how aware students were of GDPR. We really wanted to understand the impact on brands who do not treat students' data ethically. We wanted to understand how the student audience view Facebook after recent events with Cambridge Analytica. And this is what we found from our panel. So first of all, do students actually know what the GDPR is? Well, it turns out 2/3 did not know what it is at all. And of the students who do know what it is, only 1/5 know how it affects them. Having said this, in the survey that we did to our 1,000 students, we gave them a brief overview of the GDPR, and only 1 in 20 students did not think the changes to the regulation were necessary. The overwhelming majority were clearly in favour of those changes, which shows that they sort of value their data and their privacy. We also wanted to know, how will students react when they see brands, universities, websites, apps, whatever, that they spot are not GDPR compliant? And the impacts to me of this were really quite serious. So 1 in 4 students said that they would report these websites. So that's pretty serious. And 1 in 3 would completely stop using these websites.
I mean, we again in rehearsal when we were talking about this and going through this stat. So in '93, when I was a student at UEA, I stormed the registrar with the other students, and we camped overnight at some sort of, I don't know what we were complaining about at the time. What impact it made, I still don't know. Now, that was what was available in our armory as students, right? To be militant and to react. Well, what's available in a student's armory now?
Is the internet.
Is the internet.
That was before the internet.
We were sending sort of smoke signals to each other. But what students can now do, and they are militant, they are activists, they will take it into their hands, and it is tough. But although they don't realise, and I think it's really interesting here, is that I don't think GDPR. I was very surprised that people were less aware than they are of GDPR. Particularly with everything going on in the news. When we looked at these stats, it was really interesting that they weren't as aware. But when it's explained to them, and it's going to become more in the newspapers, and they're like, okay, I know what my data is. I'm aware of my own data. I'm going to really make sure that I'm going to take things into my hand. And I don't know what conclusions to draw from this.
Yeah, I mean, a third still didn't know what GDPR was, and I think this clearly demonstrates the negative impact on your brand of not being GDPR compliant. And people are only going to become more and more aware that these are the procedures you need to have in place.
Yeah, I just think it's the fundamental of just making sure that you've done things that are compliant, and that particularly if you're an education institution or any brand of trust, then you have to make sure that you're more squeaky clean than anyone else.
Yeah. I think the importance of data privacy is highlighted even further with the recent scandal with Facebook and Cambridge Analytica. So 3 in 4 students that we questioned said that their Facebook usage was affected by this. So interestingly, only 1 in 10 said they would actually delete their Facebook
1 in
account.
100.
1 in 100, sorry. 1 in 100 said they'd delete their Facebook account. The rest said they'll be more careful with what they share. So it's interesting that only 1 in 100 would delete their account.
Yeah, I mean, we've seen on the previous slides and talked about how active students are at avoiding a brand or boycotting a brand. When it's Facebook as a platform, as a utility, it is not being held to the same accountable standards. They recognise that Facebook has done the bad thing, but they're not willing to abandon it or move away from it as a platform, as they are
too
a brand.
embedded in their lifestyle.
Yeah,
It's
a utility. You're absolutely right. It's seen as it. It's quite interesting. So we do. There's 3 data sources that are quite relevant here. So one is the National Clearing Survey, where I think we've got thousands of 3,500 whatever students and their opinions and motivations on clearing, and we then we always ask what platforms you go to for it, and Facebook's at the top there. I know you run that panel for the Youth Marketing Conference. And asking what social media channels they use, and Facebook's always up there. I know UCAS only this morning released the survey they've done, which showed Facebook up there. So we constantly hear as an agency, oh, what about other channels and what do we do? And of course we pioneer and we do loads of interesting other channels, but Facebook is still where the audience are. And even after all of this nonsense that's gone on with Facebook, they still aren't deleting it. They're still,
people aren't engaging as much with Facebook, but they're on it and they're very much signed up to it, and they're still logging in.
It still is. They're still available. And what's interesting, that second point, 1 in 10 students now feel comfortable sharing their data with a messenger bot. So whether they know that the other times that they're engaging with is a messenger bot, I think that's interesting. I do think that there is going to be a challenge around. We're running campaigns that will go to Facebook Messenger bots. I know there'll be some marketers on here who'll be thinking about clearing campaigns, and there's an opportunity there for it. If you are running things and you're reliant purely on a messenger bot, just advice off the cuff would be to consider having an alternative call to action or lines of communication, because this was a large data set. It's 1,000 students. We've asked them very specific questions. 1 in 10 would feel comfortable giving that data. So 90% wouldn't with a messenger bot if it was clearly a messenger bot. So that's an interesting takeaway.
That's right. I think the phrasing of that as well is like sharing their data with a chatbot. I think that sort of scares people. Yeah. But I think when you're on a Facebook page and you're answering questions, first of all, do you know it's a chatbot?
Yeah, fair.
And then do you realise you're just handing your data over? It's interesting to know how wary students actually are of what they're doing when they're answering these questions.
I think what's come out of this survey is that, and we've got the full results on this survey. So I think what's come out of this survey, which is really interesting, is there isn't an awareness, and that's just going to build. That's just going to build, and the impact's going to carry on.
Yeah. So in terms of the actual damage to Facebook brand reputation, over 2/3 say that the scandal negatively affected how they perceive Facebook, and 1 in 4, interestingly enough, said they already expected this kind of behaviour from Facebook. Only just under 1 in 10 didn't actually believe they were at fault at all, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah, but only 1 in 100 will boycott.
Yeah,
brands. It's an amazing difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
So what we're going to do now is briefly talk about where this data came from that we use for those stats, which we just talked through. So as I've mentioned before, we have millions of students already reading and leaving student reviews and opinions. So we launched the Student Hut Opinion Panel to help brands and universities run market research. So we've got thousands of students who are actively signed up to the panel who essentially offer their opinions to brands in the form of market research, video surveys, focus groups and workshops. And this is really interesting for me. So there's obviously hundreds and hundreds of brands out there and universities competing for the attention of the youth market and students. And what's really exciting to me is to see the way that our clients are able to use the actual data insights in order to inform their decisions and get that competitive advantage. So as well as being able to drive thousands of responses, we can also target very specific niche audiences based on your requirements. Just last week, we ran a survey where the client wanted us to reach 20 first-year students from 10 different universities. So that's the type of thing we can do. And on the slide there, you can see some of the demographics that we can reach. We also ran another survey recently with one of our clients, Milkround. And with that survey, what we did was essentially help them to identify competitors. We helped them to establish their reputation as an online jobs board for students and graduates. We also helped them to identify areas for improvements. We then put together a full analysis report for them with the help of Natives Group, and Milkround are going to use that report in order to inform their core offering and marketing strategy.
I think, just on a real quick one, we didn't mention it, but I don't know what the title of that survey, the GDPR Student Privacy Survey.
Students, GDPR and brands.
Yeah, so right, that was the name of the survey that we sent out to students. Within an hour, we had to turn it off because we had 1,000 responses.
Yeah.
I mean, they do want to give an opinion.
They do. The engagement is insane on the market research.
Yeah.
We've never had a click rate lower than 30% on any email we sent out. So if a client's paid for 1,000 responses, we have to keep a very close eye on it.
Yeah,
otherwise we're going to get way too many.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, it's interesting as well. Look, it's worth talking about the type of content. So why are we doing it? It's because you want to get the opinion. So I know you were going to say about it, but I'm going to dive in because I'm so interested, and obviously I'm biased, but I'm really interested in asking this panel and ask these students, did they vote in Brexit, and would they vote again, and would their perceptions changed? And so that's a survey we're running over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah.
I know you did one last week.
We've got quite a few going on. So as well as running these surveys for clients, we also use them to drive interesting content pieces around topics. So Steve mentioned the Brexit one. We pushed out a survey last week focused around mental health at university. We've also got another survey coming up soon around student accommodation. And I suppose actually if any listeners on the webinar have any questions or sort of interesting topics that they want to pose to our student audience, please feel free to leave a question on the webinar or drop me an email.
Cool. Okay, so look, we're slightly over time, I think. So I'm
all right. 5 minutes, yeah.
5 minutes, cool. So look, let me summarise so we can get on to questions. Basically get your house in order. You've got 1 week left. You need to be GDPR compliant. So that's fundamental. And once you've done that, which should be done anyway, but once you have done that, really think about it in terms of it being an opportunity and embrace it and think, this is great. I have a trusted brand. I've got an engaged audience. I can really, really reach out and change how I reach with them with content and how I talk about them, starting with the why. Why do you exist? Why do students want to sign up? And why can you say something that's going to be relevant and resonate?
Yeah, there's definitely still time for that as well. There's 7 days.
7 days.
7 emails, 7 days. Think about your why.
Yeah.
As many of those active subscribers back.
You've got a couple of hours this afternoon. And also, focusing on those metrics that matter, right? So fundamentally, we've got a lot of universities. We've got dozens and dozens and dozens of people that have signed up for this and are listening to it now. A lot of them are institutions. Your metrics that matter are going to be student enrollment numbers. So, start there, work downwards. And that's the important metrics, not number of emails, not number of opens, not number of clicks. And as Rich said as well, actually, it's a really lovely, valid point. These metrics are going to change for your publishers. Be aware of that, but also go back and challenge them with that and see what the engagement site's for. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Great.
Yeah, as we've mentioned, the full report is coming soon. We should have it ready for you next week, and we're going to give everybody who signed up to this webinar an exclusive window where you'll have the full report soon. So not only will it include the couple of the big headline insights that we pulled out here, there's over 100,000 data points were analysed in this report, and it's a 20-page report for you. So we'll pop that across to you next week. And we mentioned it a couple of times during the presentation, but as part of the YMS conference, we did a report where we analysed over 165,000 data points and did deep dive qualitative surveys with just under 1,800 students on how they perceive brands on social media in 2018 and some of the basic mistakes that brands are making and how students want to be communicated with. And it's a really, really interesting report that can really help shape your marketing strategies. And that is available as a free download to you as well. And again, we'll put it in the email following this presentation. And finally, I just want to invite you to our Natives Group event, which is ASDI on the 19th of July. It's a fantastic opportunity for senior marketers to come along, network, but also hear and see from some of not just the biggest brands, but also the biggest platforms, and ask those challenging questions. We've got Facebook attending as well as Google, and it really is a cracking opportunity to come along and ask some of the questions that you want to ask them directly about all of the issues we've talked about here today, but perhaps particularly related to your institutions. And that's the end of our presentation. So if you wanted to pop any questions or anything that you wanted us to go into more depth about, or any of the issues that we've raised here today, do please pop them in the question box and we'll get round to them. I can see that there's been a couple that have come through already. So if we don't get through to all of them, we will put them in a Q&A and again, put that as part of the resources at the end of this presentation. But we're going to just pause it for 30 seconds, have a glass of water, have a look at your questions, and then we'll turn the microphone back on and get through some of these questions for you. So thank you very much, and we'll be back in 2 minutes. Okay, we're back. Thank you for your questions. We have had quite a few come through, so we'll put them in a blog and pop that out to you. So I think we've probably got time for a couple. The first one being about how do you use this data post GDPR to build lookalike audiences? How does it impact on lookalike?
Yeah, which was a question, which is a good question. So anyone who knows how lookalike audiences work is that it's a product that's available within Facebook and Google and most of the platforms now, where you can load up an email list, and then it will tell you who that custom audience is. So whether that email list, if you've got 1,000 emails, have they got 1,000 Facebook accounts? So they've used that email to create a Facebook account, for example, and then based on that, you can then create a lookalike. So digital twins, Facebook call it, to the people that have created the original account. This is why we built our own proprietary hashing tool, so we could do that, and we could do that ethically. I'm going to be a little bit naughty and not answer it directly, only because, look, we're a leading student marketing agency, and there are certain things that we do which are our IP. The short answer is you can use that data. The long answer is that it needs to be compliant within GDPR. I'm going to go back to that specific person myself, and if anyone else wants to email and ask that question, and for us to go back to you, I'll answer it individually. But I don't want to go into too much detail on the tricks and how we work things. And it's not because it's non-GDPR compliant or anything like that. It's just that we work really hard, and we meet with Facebook every 3 months, and we've spent tens and tens of thousands of pounds on our own data to make sure it's GDPR compliant and how we can use it. We also work with Google. We're a Google Premier Partner. We were just recently appointed Rockstar status, which means we're in the top 1% of all agencies in the world for our performance. So we really do have good insight. I think that's something we should share with our clients rather than to open forum.
Yeah, of course. And my favourite question is questions that you should ask your publishers about GDPR.
Oh, questions you would like to be asked, Dan.
Well, it's quite interesting that the most common question we get is, are you GDPR compliant? Which is a pretty simple question to answer, really.
Yeah.
I think if you're speaking to your publishers, you need to go deeper than that and really understand what it is they're doing and the different campaigns they're running. So, I'd ask, what campaigns did you actually run to re-engage your list? Actually ask for examples of those. Try and get the landing pages sent over for those actual campaigns so you can assess them yourselves.
It's really interesting to be transparent, because that Dan and Student Hub have been incredibly transparent about their process in this case study, and I bet you won't find many, if any, publishers, particularly in our sector, sharing their landing pages or sharing their campaigns in such a public arena. But again, it comes back to, don't hammer a publisher for having a knock to their vanity metrics when they've genuinely gone through a process to create a more re-engaged list, and they're willing to share that with you.
Anecdotally, leaving on a because a couple of people have dropped off, but we've still got dozens and dozens of you. A leading national newspaper had a drop off of 80% from their emails. 80% of their subscribed emails dropped off, and 90% of their jobs and courses drop off. So that is phenomenal, and it's going to change. It will take ages. So it has and will have an impact, right?
Yeah, that's a good question to ask. Just directly, what impact has GDPR had on your marketing list? And if they say none, they're probably not being that truthful, right? It's going to have an impact on every single publisher.
And they have to change their privacy policies. So we have spent a lot of money. I keep going back to this, but as the CEO, I always worry about the money spent. But we've spent a lot of money on privacies and on privacy policies, and we have to change our privacy policy for Student Hut and for us as a group. So you probably want to have a look at their privacy policy and ask, have you changed your privacy policy to be GDPR compliant? There's simple questions to ask. It is going to be a challenge for a lot of publishers. It will be a challenge, I think, and you just need to make sure that you're working with publishers that are making steps to try and do it, which is all fair. It's all good. Which is all good.
Great. Okay, we've run a couple of minutes over, so I think it's probably a good time to finish up the presentation and the webinar. So first of all, thanks to Dan and Steve for joining us and taking part today and sharing with you their case studies. But also thank you to everyone who subscribed and joined the live broadcast, and to those of you who are now listening on demand. So thank you very much. Next steps are we'll pop out an email this afternoon where we'll ask for your feedback, and that would be so hugely valuable to us for future broadcasts. So if you could take a few moments to have a look at that. And we'll also package up this presentation with the recording and the audio, and we'll be sending that to you on Monday. And that will include a link to all of the resources that we referred to, including the confidence survey, links to the white papers, and also if you had any questions for us, then you can respond to either of those emails or get in touch via the various websites that we've shown you today. So thank you very much, and we'll see you at ASDI, I hope.
Hey, thank you.
Thank you from me.